We are going to continue our topic that we just started to look into. How do you craft the best messages out there? And I'm very happy. I'm very, very happy that 3 people are on the stage who know more about this than most. And 2 of them work for a design agency out of Portland, Oregon, called Eroy. They work on 2 of their biggest accounts, Taco Bell and Nike. I'm allowed to say that. They might not. I'll figure that out later. And the moderator of the panel is somebody who I had the chance to connect with a few years back, and is one of the leading people in the newsletter industry. And I'm so happy that she's going to take you through this talk and dive deep into how to craft the messages of today. Thank you, Angie Maurer, Cher Fuller, and Jackie Baltic. Have a warm welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
And there's just one thing that I wanted to mention, because we're silent disco mode. So we're just going to have a conversation here that's not very loud. And in order to understand everybody well, go back into podcast mode, please. Put your headphones on, and I'll put the shades down so the first row isn't on the spot. So thank you, and you don't have to speak loud at all.
I know, this is so weird. It is very weird. Can you raise your hand if you can hear me? All right, cool. So the format of the session is Cher's going to talk for a few minutes about what she works on, and Angie's going to show a presentation as well. Then I will ask some questions, some of which Felix will feed in, I understand, through the feed, and also in the room you're asking questions, and we'll then open it up to the Q&A. So, all right, we'll get started. Hand it over to Cher.
Okay, you know in Men in Black when they do the pen where it erases your memory? Pretend Felix didn't tell you it was Nike, okay? There we go. Largest footwear company in the world. Hi, I'm Cher. This is Angie. We, like Felix said, work at Eroy, which is a digital agency in Portland, Oregon, which is this one, this Portland, and not this one.
But I actually disagree with this slide, because that Portland, I'm from Portland, it is like that.
Yeah, people are like, is that show real?
It's
We're
really
like,
embarrassing,
unfortunately,
and
yes.
it's super accurate.
Like, where did the chicken come from? I'm like, well, where did it come from? Anywho, okay. So anyway, we work
Portland,
on email,
you've heard of it.
web, and social at Eroy. These are some of our clients that we work on, and Angie and I work on the top left 2.
Largely.
All right, so I am the lead strategist for Taco Bell. I wrote the entire email and one-to-one messaging program for their transactional and marketing program. So if you get an email from Taco Bell, it came from here. And what's crazy about Taco Bell and kind of where we've really started and put our foot down with them is, this is the kind of content that's coming out from a branded perspective, and this is what their audience knows and loves. And these were the emails they were sending. So, my favorite part is welcome, Cher. Like, Jesus Christ. Okay. So, we took a look at this and just kind of started challenging them on the belief that email is the redheaded stepchild of the digital channel world, and said to them, this is actually one of the most personalized and top channels for conversions, and you guys need to be treating it the same way that you treat all of your other branded channels. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of the emails that we've done for them and kind of the thinking and strategy behind it of how we got there. People always end up saying at conferences like, that's great for you that you have Taco Bell money. I don't. So how am I supposed to do this? So I'm very, very aware of that. I think we are the scrappiest kids in the world. Like sometimes I feel like we're kids playing with brands' money, but everything that we do is applicable to any brand, any nonprofit. It's just about the application of how you apply that to the content that you have in the audience. So keep that in mind. So my first one is a Cyber Monday email, and it's about being in on the joke. So we were faced with a huge, I don't want to say challenge, opportunity for Cyber Monday, that we had no deals and we had nothing to offer. And we were going into an inbox day when everyone is sending emails. So how are we going to be different? So what we did was basically take a holiday and kind of, take all the worst things about Cyber Monday and make it into a huge joke. So it's like Cyber Monday, 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 fun day, every day, all day. This is the shit that you can get any time of the day. But we're putting it in this fun, crazy kind of used car salesman format. And this email was one of their highest engagement emails because people were just so happy to take a break from the usual content they were getting. So I think it's important to look at days in which you're sending on holidays. P.S. Never send shit on 9/11. Can we say that for the record? Okay, thank you. God.
Every year it happens.
Oh God. Be in on the joke. You're sending to human beings. So what would you want to get? What is the kind of content you would want to consume? Think about that. Give the people what they want. So this email was what we did for holiday a few seasons ago. And so what we actually did was take an entire audit of all of the emails that we had done in the entire year and see, okay, what type of content performed well, what kind of messaging, formatting, long form, short form, interactive qualities, what was it that performed well? And we took that audit and made, a 5-point bullet list of all of those things and then said, okay, this is what we've seen to be the most compelling type of content and messaging for our audience. So we're going to build something that's like a gift for them specifically within email to really give them that branded experience. And so what this is just using tab technology within email. So it's if you ever open an Excel sheet, you can click on the tabs, it takes you to different sheets. This is basically the same idea. So it's a choose your own adventure where when you click on the different vehicles up top, it's basically putting a mask over and showing you different paths on the way you can get to Taco Bell to see your friends. Show and tell. I think a lot of us, when we are talking about giving branded content, we always tell people, show them, don't tell them. And this really comes back to the storytelling aspect. Email deserves to have storytelling in it. People are one-to-one looking at a screen, reading your content. So it's kind of funny, but the voice and tone that we took for this story was the Taco Bell stoner. And so if you had a burrito that was full of cheese in the core and you were super stoned, what would blow your mind? And I mean, honestly, sometimes I'm we get paid for this.
There's 4 people laughing harder than everyone else, and we should hang out.
But so we basically took this persona that we had created and drafted this story about the cheesy core burrito, and then incorporated at the bottom this little are you cheesy or are you crunchy, or maybe it's spicy, I don't remember which one. Spicy, crunchy, or spicy. So giving them a voting module. And I'll say, kind of before we get to the last one, is something that I believe really strongly in emails is not always giving people just emails for transactions. So I realize that you, your boss, the brands you work for, whoever wants to make money, but if you want to keep a healthy email list, you need to give people branded content that they actually want to interact with. So if you have a friend that only calls you on the weekends because they're hey, can you help me move? And the first time you're sure, I'll help you move. But then every weekend it's can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Can I have this? Can I borrow your shoes? You borrow your shoes? I don't know. You stop answering those calls, and that's what starts to happen with really bad emails that only ask you to buy stuff. You should want people to see your name pop up in their inbox, and they're oh, I wonder what they did this time.
I think also that generally is a known thing in almost every other channel, right? So there are very few commercial spots, or if you were doing a series of print ads where, even if it were, a JCPenney type client where their whole thing is giving coupons, right? If every single piece of communication they put out were the coupons, people get sick of it, right? And we know that on every other channel. But then when we think of email, we think, well, it's email, they've asked for this, they want this thing, or we're putting this out for a reason, and it's all super transactional. And I think sometimes things that are very obvious don't get said, and the same best practices that we use across other channels, you should be employing across email. And also, kind of, it's now been touched on twice, people generally opt in for email. So while when you're thinking about cadence, you definitely don't want to overwhelm your user, but you should also be aware that they have told you that they want this communication. So you have the ability to speak directly from the brand's voice, not through an intermediary, which is perhaps why some intermediaries aren't supposed to talk about who their clients are. But it's super personal, and don't take advantage of that. Think of it, as Cher was saying, very much like your friend. If you can't add value, don't send the email. If you don't have value to add, but you have some sort of reason that you need to send the email, think of something super fun like Stony Tacos, right? There has to be something that is compelling about your content, even if your content isn't being put out there to compel somebody else to act.
Okay, so kind of in that same regard, long-term relationships. You want to enter into a monogamous long-term relationship with your readers. So we want to make sure that we're actually giving them things that they want to keep and share. And so one of the things about this email, this is actually a pretty old email. It's one of the emails we did for them a few years ago, but it continues to be the top performing email ever produced for Taco Bell. This was for the launch of breakfast a few years ago. We created this scrolling game where basically we just dev'd the characters on the Z index so that they stayed fixed in fixed positioning and stationary. And as you scrolled through the email, you saw 3 different scenarios of 3 people going to Taco Bell, going to a clown breakfast, and having no breakfast, and really where they ended up at the end of the day. So, and I shared this last year as well, but this email did horrible. It was our worst performing email we'd ever sent, because breakfast is a 3-hour window. So when we sent it, everybody was like, cool, and then they couldn't order anything. So we were like, oh, okay, note to self, never send breakfast emails again. But the thing is, the email was so cool, people saved it and forwarded it to their friends. And every month when we pull performance reports, the numbers for this email, and this email is 2 years old at this point, are higher and higher and higher, because it continues to live on and be something that people want to share with their friends. So while at the time when we killed ourselves over making this email, I was like, oh my God, we're gonna get fired. The biggest failure became one of our greatest successes, because we actually gave people content that they wanted to interact with.
There you go. Oh, you click.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so on the design side of things and on the visual, probably bringing up templates isn't the first thing you expected me to say. I'm recent to eRoy. I've been here about 5 months. The agency's been around almost 20 years, and we don't have to get too far into this, but a number of years ago, the CEO realized that AI, some of which we were working on ourselves, was about to tech us out of an industry. And so recently, the CEO has brought on new leadership, a bunch of folks that were big agency folks, to come in and kind of relaunch eRoy as a full-service agency. So that will actually happen with a new name and everything next year. But in the meantime, I like to tell people that we're playing poker with somebody else's money, because the 20 years of equity and the global and the client base that the CEO has built up, that work isn't going away. So when I was tasked with coming in and kind of making the transition from the Super Bowl spots to people's inboxes, a couple of things had to happen. One, I just personally and also was hired to come in and make the existing work better, and a lot of that was just that channel agnostic kind of thing, coming in with a set of eyes going, oh no, you guys are doing it and the client's happy, but can't we just do this? And sometimes the answer is no, but the fact that very few people kind of from the outside had come in and asked those questions, and I think that's indicative of the category in general, because email is so ubiquitous that I think often most people have stopped asking those questions, and they just think, yeah, just write the copy, we're delivering it. And what I found is the quickest way to get to really, really good creative work is to get your production down, right? So the other thing I put here is guardrails can actually make you more creative. And if any of you guys are like designers proper, but I think also strategists and other people see this in their own lives as well, once you know what you can't do, you start trying to find ways to crack that, right? Trying to find ways to work interestingly within that, in those guardrails, and also interesting ways to get around them. So although it's not intuitive, the very first thing that I did when I came into eRoy on the footwear and apparel account and across our agency, across our 9 largest accounts, was move every single person onto a modular templated system. We built individual templates for each of those clients. Click. Oh, never mind. I'll show you the templates in a second.
Like she forgot about the cast.
And this is the best part. This is my metaphor for templating and then breaking out of it. So when we were hunter-gatherers, right, we didn't have leisure time. All of a sudden, we're like, wait a second. Own cows and grow some vegetables and set up camp. And then all of a sudden we had leisure time, and like that was the first bit, and then the Industrial Revolution, now the tech revolution, all of those things, right? But all of that was making sure you had your basics where you needed them. So email right now, or where I needed to get it before we could start doing more creative work, was making sure that we were raising our own cows. And so after we moved everybody onto a template, then we end up with leisure time, and we do all sorts of awful things with our leisure time, right? But they're super sticky and people want to talk about it. So I use this as the analogy of what we could do. If we can get everybody onto the template, how can we use our free time to create content that people want to look at that still is a design-based solution and solving something for a client? And I think that's where we use like data and strategy instead of just trends and memes. So my goal is to go somewhere in between setting up your own farm and the Kardashians. Next. So in general, don't waste time doing the thing that you do for every single client in every single email. Don't build new footers each time. And that sounds very obvious, but even if your designers, for instance, are just grabbing like old emails and then putting in new content, every time they're dragging or cutting and pasting something, things are getting moved, they're getting shifted, they're getting adjusted. All of a sudden, you're 5 designers down, and the CTA is a different width, and nobody's using the brand colors, right? If that happens, when we put everything up on a wall to have some sort of critique, we're talking about the width of CTAs and the colors of your buttons, right? We're not talking about the content you've actually put there, the framing of an image. They've asked us to do something here that could just be static, but maybe we could use some of these motion experiments we've been working on. So what we do, like I said, what we've done for all of our clients are build these templates. For Lifetime Fitness, for instance, we said at our most basic, here's what lifetime content can look like. And you can have different variations of headers and footers or the colors of your buttons, whatever. But everything goes to this system first. We teach the internal folks at all of our brand partners how to use the template. So we'll build them in Sketch and let them figure out how to put them into their own like ESPs if they use their own bit. And then for everything that we build, we'll keep updating this toolkit every time we come up with something new. And so here's an example of what we do for Lifetime. Click. Here's a more detailed example. So this is when you click into just the headers on our Lifetime things. And we really are going down to like, this is how many pixels and this is that. And we get all of this aligned, and then I'll show you even another level deeper. This is for 2 different clients here. So on the left here, this was for a brewing client, and on the right, this is one of our apparel clients. And these are just like, these are 2 sections of things that we keep updating for these clients. But if you've ever seen, and I know you guys all have because you're at this conference, from maybe either of these brands or similar brands, you'll realize that very infrequently do they always look the same. The goal about the template is to get everything to look like a blank email. So swoosh email, Kona email, Lifetime email. And then from there, that's when we start breaking it. So you can only evolve and experiment and expand if you're having those meaningful conversations when you're doing your critiques. And those don't happen unless we're all on the same baseline page. So if you click through, lots of the times, this is the kind of work that comes out of the wall sessions with my teams. And none of this, you will never see any of this on a client email or client communication. All of these were billable hours. So one, I would say just for morale and for your designers, getting the nuts and bolts locked down so you can do creative experiments is just great for morale and development. But it also gives you a lot of interesting ideas maybe for other clients. So it's a Bay Equity client, is this mortgage client you're seeing in the background top here, and we were thinking about how things could move on the website. But the way that things kind of stack and load and slide into place then got us thinking about how we could actually use that in a tab structure in a different email. Our footwear client doesn't have 3D modeling like this because that's not on brand for them. But after we started doing these experiments, this then led to, well, what happens if paint comes down and drips in from the top of that frame and then the shoe starts changing colors, which eventually turns into something like an animation for a custom shoe, right? And so all of those things came from making sure they were on the template first and then spending 90% of our time on things that probably won't ever see the light of day into an email. The same thing for the potato illustration. We did an on-site where an illustrator came in and we just did some storytelling exercises. And from there, we started doing some digital drawing and regular drawing. And by the end of the day, again, all billable hours, all super pertinent professional development. And, we'd made a zine with, an itchy potato that had hives, which when you see the whole thing makes sense, but even if you don't, it's kind of fun. And here's an example that's more applicable to an actual client. So Oregon College Savings Plan, which is part of the Oregon Savings Network, we have a couple of categories there. Their goal, like as a brand from a brand voice, is not to ever be transactional. It's about support, it's about helping you save, it's about information. But they're a financial client. So they're like, we want to sell you our heart. And it's one of the few instances where the client oftentimes is like, sure, but you have my money. And so we have kind of like, we have an opportunity on Oregon College Savings Plan that made for a good case study in this, which is almost every email. Our metrics for success on OCSP is clicks, conversions, all those things, the transactional things that you would think about. This is one of our best performing emails, and that's because we set ourselves up with changing the metrics before we started. So this last October, Oregon College Savings Plan didn't have any tactical goal for us. We have a regular cadence set up with them where we send monthly. We could change that and do an ad hoc at a different time of year or that kind of thing. But we recognize that Halloween is actually a time, unlike, say, Cyber Monday, where your inbox generally isn't flooded. So we didn't want to waste that opportunity when maybe we could have a bigger strength as a brand in somebody's inbox anyway. So we started thinking about how can we maybe use illustration or because this is the visual look of our emails, and talk about something that's spooky, that isn't school age, that still feels pertinent for finances, but has that human kind of voice. And what we did here was just add only information and talk about how finances are scary. The animation brings you down visually, points to the content, and then you scroll down. One small reveal at the bottom, or one small call to action at the bottom. And as we suggested to them, the point of this is not going to be click-through. What we'd like to see is how this compares. If we're doing just information and not really asking you to do anything, we want to know, comparative to every other email we've sent, how much time they're spending in this email. That's a number that we look at for all of our sends, but we were able to frame it with the client going, okay, so given all of these things, given in October, right, what if all we do is be like, man, let's just shine a light on some of this stuff. And that's it. That's the only goal. And people spent 10 seconds longer in this email than any other email that we sent out for Oregon College Savings Plan last year. And the click-through was very low. And that was fine because we'd sold the strategy in, and then we executed on it. And when we set out, illustrating things, because we do kind of a library and also custom things for this client every month, at no point did we think about spooky trees and shadows moving, right? That only came out of the entire process that I was just saying. This isn't what any of their other emails look like, and in general, a client would say no to that. But you can't start pitching things like this or pitching them successfully if they don't know that you're rooted in the data in some sort of structural system first. And piggybacking on what Cher said about many of you folks perhaps are working in-house for a brand that can't hire an outside agency, or you don't have budget for your current agency to do custom things every month. That's another argument for investing and beginning at the template so that they can consistently. Oh, nobody has ever asked me to be louder. I was trying to be super cognizant of that. Where was I just at? I just got confused.
Make the template.
Oh, yeah, for the in-house team. So this is one way that you can stretch your dollar a little further. So if you invest in the front of creating a template, or if you can't custom code a template, at least pulling together some sort of user guide with whatever client and assets you have, then you can use your more money and your additional spend thinking of more creative things, thinking of exceptions to your rules, and thinking of ways to surprise and delight your client. But surprise and delight, if it's not based on a framework and some sort of data or strategy, is just going to seem uncomfortable for your client. So the goal is set a system, be ruthlessly strict with yourself, and then 90% of the things you deliver to the client probably don't actually look like the template. So that's how we tackle it.
I will just add too, in terms of a lot of people neglect to do, they do like a design, a brand book or a design playbook, but they don't have email playbooks. And it's something that we see a lot of companies think that like, well, it's just a small team. But what ends up happening is when you don't have any guidelines or anything that you can hand off to people, a lot of times the, the newest person that comes in or the most junior person will get tasked with email because people think it's not that important. And then you have somebody who doesn't understand the channel or doesn't know what the boundaries are of what they can do, coming in and doing really mediocre and vanilla things.
Well, and let me jump in on that, which is there was a little bit.
I did that exact same thing. It was fell.
There was a little bit maybe of an ego check when I decided to take. I closed down my own studio to take this job at eRoy, and the person who went there before me, which is how I was recruited, had a little bit of like a jerky thing where he was like, yeah, it's great, but the new business we're chasing is great. The rest is just email. And I thought, a little bit of deference wouldn't kill you. He's no longer with us. He's still a friend. But
No, he's not dead. He's just
he's dead to me.
R.I.P. He's not with us anymore.
Yeah, and so what I did, when I kind of had to question him first about his ego, and then reflect on myself about maybe was I also being weird, I just went to the strategy team and the data team, and I started asking for some numbers. And emails that go through our agency reach 20 million people a month. That's double the Super Bowl every single month. So anybody that says it's just email or tasks a brand new intern with doing all of the communication it is really not living in 2018. Again, remember the personalization that people have opted in. Almost all of the other marketing and the brand work that they're going to encounter in a day, unless they're going to an owned property, somebody's Facebook page or your .com, is all things that are being put upon them, right? Email, they've asked you. Don't take it for granted. Align it with the rest of the branding, and set yourself up for success. Right now, it's not that much harder to do a pretty good job at email. And if you put in like a legit amount of effort the way you would to any other channel, like you're gonna be bitching. And yeah, guardrails make you better. But anyway, 20 mil a month, it's not just email. If you're running an email program and somebody else in your marketing department is like, oh, it's cool, you run the email program. Ask for the numbers. I bet your numbers are also impressive.
When your emails start to want to come in and start throwing their shit on the bottom of it, you can be like, I'm sorry, that's not in our playbook. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah,
we're not putting a bumper sticker on a Bentley. Are you crazy? Get out of here.
Also, I know that not just at this agency that I'm at now, but especially at this agency, because we're in this relaunching and we're doing more things, there was a lot of focus on pitching new categories and new clients, which is great. They brought in people that have experience with different clients and in different categories. But by far, I've only been here 6 months. In the last 6 months, we've doubled our business with our larger client because we started putting out more interesting email, and that won us major work on their paid media and their .com. And for the last 12 or 15 years, that hadn't been true even with the same client. So you can make incremental change and you can make big change by doing really tactical things at the beginning.
Yeah. Thank you both for these presentations.
You're welcome. I realized we didn't introduce ourselves.
I'm Angie Maurer, I'm Design Director.
Yeah. I'm Cher, I'm Associate Director of Strategy. Sorry. I was like, I don't know if they know it.
I'm Jackie Boltic. I'm the CEO of a software company called Yellow Brim. And we make software that helps with email production, which I think is a really good segue into our questions. Note from Felix, the questions can be submitted through the Eventee app. So please submit your questions, and I can kind of sprinkle them in with some of my own. I was really excited when I saw your presentations that you focus on templates, because I think it's not talked enough about, and it's a great concrete way in a conference like this where we're thinking about innovation, we're thinking about the future, of putting some frameworks into innovation in the future. And one term that Felix had mentioned that I know is a buzzword that we want to differentiate kind of off the bat is AI versus automation. And so just one example that I had heard of recently from the Litmus conference. Anyone attend the Litmus conference in this room? Yeah. So I wasn't there.
I'm shocked.
So you can correct me if any of this secondhand storytelling is wrong, but I thought it was a really good example. And as we try to save time so we can, focus on, doing experiments and making things better, where automation can kind of go wrong. And it was Pinterest, where they were tracking what people were looking at, and then they were sending out newsletters, and they started sending like 9/11 emails to people, which was, can you verify that they gave that example? Yes. And so we were talking before this about kind of how to think about automation versus AI and where we are today, and the growing pains of, yes, we're trying to save time, yes, we're making templates, like software I created with my company that tries to save time, but a human still oversees it. Where do you see that now with kind of challenges and opportunities, and even just ways to think about it? Because I think AI is such a buzzword that people a lot of times try to label automation as AI.
Yeah,
how do you think about it?
I think that you're absolutely right. I think automation is not at all AI. I think that automation is the first step to developing AI. So kind of the difference that I like to think about it is automation is the ability to trigger emails and send without having to input something again, right? So writing some sort of system where people are tracking what I'm looking and then sending a newsletter or some otherwise feeding into it. AI is the ability to design a program that moderates that automation. So right now, in beta, sure, it's all over. But we're only right now starting to see like the hoverboards we were promised, if you know what I mean. And that's only now happening because we're seeing this from the broader perspective, right? So instead of folks that are coding and thinking in ones and zeros, which are super important, and they are the spine of that program, it's the spine, not the heart. And I think that the closer we get to that, the less frequently you'll have to have people actually moderate. But the people that are going to win, like the AI wars, as it were, are the people that are going to be able to separate that and find that human touch first. The first people that can get rid of moderators, that's when you're actually going to see AI work in the way that we're talking about. Another example is like with Facebook a number of years ago. I'm sure you guys read about Facebook knowing you were pregnant before you knew you were pregnant, right? Because the things you were looking. That also becomes a problem, and perhaps a much more poignant problem if you think about women that miscarry. So automation is continuing to retarget baby things to a person who is searching baby things. AI is the ability to not do that if they also start searching medical things for miscarriage.
Great, thank you. And my take on kind of where we are, and I'm curious to hear yours as well, Cher, is that on the automation front, things are getting better. But on the AI front, we still have a ways to go. And just being honest about that and focusing on freeing up our time through some level of automation that is monitored in a way where you can still have excellent content. And then making sure that you are able to experiment and delight your customers with quality content that a human thinks up. I don't know if Cher, if you have anything.
I think the issue that we have is people are so interested in kind of like a set it and forget it when it comes to automation that they allow a machine to replicate trends but not apply a layer of critical thinking across what those trends. So a lot of times when we see like Twitter bots that go rogue, it's because they're picking up the trends of what people are trying to teach it, and they become like Nazis basically online because people love to do weird stuff online. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay.
Microsoft one. Microsoft, yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry. what we've kind of started to do with some of our Taco Bell emails is introduce metadata tags to start to code the images of the emotions that they should be conveying, so that we can start to teach the machine what emotions are and what emotions are attached to certain types of images, so that we can start to see what people resonate with, and then we can start to filter them in and segment them into different areas based on emotion, and then tie those into geographical locations so that we can do more customized emails. But we're never just letting the machine run it on its own. We're setting it out there, reviewing, seeing what it comes back with, but constantly having to review to make sure that the machines don't go rogue.
And the better AI gets, the more like the time example we brought up originally was. So the better the AI is, the more it frees you up to do more and interesting and different work.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're doing some really interesting work in data. In the example where you said you knew how long people were spending, how are you measuring that? That was an audience question.
We use litmus pixels in all of our emails to be able to see how much time people are spending on the page, where they're clicking, and then Google Analytics to look at different types of event assists of what we're setting up. But before we ever approach an email, what our agency really focuses on and is really heavy in is the data and strategy. So we have a data strategy team that we work with really closely to make sure that we're looking at the emails that came before us, looking at the results and saying, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean for the people that are consuming it? And what can we learn from that to put that into the next email? And setting up our KPIs specifically for that campaign, and then pairing that with the data that we're pulling to make sure that it was either successful based on our learning. So we're constantly taking in that data and that information to kind of like check ourselves and to test it to see where that next iteration comes from.
We basically have 3 distinct steps on any of our projects, and it's data, insights, and content. We wouldn't jump to any of the others. We wouldn't start looking for insights unless we had good numbers. It would be really hard for me to put forth a really well-designed solution or communicate something if we hadn't talked about the insights that she had from the learnings. So what we found, and what I found now being at a smaller, we're about 80 people all day at our agency, coming from a place that I was 700 in my global office or in my central office before, is that when you can sit around the table with somebody who can code, with somebody who does the data, with somebody who can help with insights, with somebody who can draw, those conversations and those meetings are much more productive, and the work is almost always better. And sometimes people, you need to get the info and go in silo and come back. You have to figure out the right way to work for your team, but working with your team, as cliche as that sounds, is really key. And especially when we're talking about that human interaction, because even when it's not AI, since we have different experiences, there are things that I might catch that Cher wouldn't, or Cher would catch that, so-and-so shouldn't, right? So that collaboration, it's a value for the client because the work is better, but it's also moving you forward as a company and your own data going forward, because you're collecting information on yourselves, and it's not just your own anecdotal, and the data set you're looking at for that specific execution is broader.
Great, thank you. I'm just curious, a show of hands, how many people here have multiple people involved in their email production? So most, so that's relevant for, it's always good to get a sense of the audience. All right, so changing gears to another question, which is I think a really good one on the strategy side. How does design and strategy change when the goal is education and not promotion for email? So we're in that huddle where the group of 4 people about to have this discussion. That question is posed. Yeah, go.
Oh, well, it's not just Oregon College Savings Plan that we have these discussions with, but it's one that lends itself to answer this question. And that's, we are still talking about, even if we're not trying to compel a certain action, we're still trying to convey a message and compel a behavior, I guess, more than an action. Where, for instance, when we didn't have that specific call to action for October, the behavior was to stay in the email and stay invested because we didn't want to lose that touch point that we were doing monthly. If we weren't sending out that particular email, or perhaps the decision had been made since there's no CTA that month, right? we're going to have touch points other places, then we would redistribute so they still see us. And then that, I guess, would be like less of a direct click here to ask. But it starts with that strategy in the planning where we go, what is the role of the brand, not just the role of the product. And so the role of the brand for Oregon College Savings Plan is to support and inform. Right? So even though the action we're often trying to compel are signups or referrals, the behavior we're always putting forth, the message we're always checking back against is whether or not we're adding value to, if not their account, to their financial knowledge base, and to their, if we're compelling them to keep us top of mind, refer them to their friends at some point in the future, even if there isn't a quantitative value for that particular thing. So we're still going back to the same strategy, but sometimes we're just trying to reinforce behavior, and sometimes we're trying to compel action.
Yeah, and that's a great point about product market fit with email, where normally we don't think about that. They tend to go towards opens and clicks, and not thinking about email as a product that's delivering a value. I think one person who does that really well, who's not here but has been here in the past, is Matt Kaiser, who does What the Fuck Just Happened Today, which is a newsletter. Yes, it's amazing, and he's a product person, and he created a great email that's a product that provides value. And I think it's really amazing how you guys are doing that for brands and taking that approach where you're not just looking at opens and clicks as this is success. Just a quick plug for Matt and others. There's in the newsletter space. So I'm involved through Yellow Brim, my company, and the Harvard Shorenstein Center for Media and Politics at the Kennedy School on a project Newsletter Guide, which it's focusing specifically on newsletters, but it's, we talked about a lot of people in the space and compiled some learning. So I just want to say, sign up if you want to learn about that. But it's definitely refreshing to hear you thinking about these, not just for media brands where the content is their product, but that you're thinking about it for other brands as well.
Newsletters are going to be the new podcasts, which is a joke to everyone in this room that I'm sure has known what podcasts are for 25 years.
I just wanted to jump in that last question. So one thing that my team at eRoy is really tasked with is understanding the culture around the audiences that we're trying to reach. And I think something that's really important as we kind of move into this new wave of oversaturation of audience members is that people don't need brands. They really don't. Like, we're moving into an era of content creation where kids are building their own empires on Instagram and YouTube. They don't need brands anymore. So it's really important to remember that brands need people. So the content that we create needs to reflect the culture of the people that we're trying to reach. So to answer the question of how does the strategy change, it's probably the most important question when you start a project of what is it that you want people to do and how are you going to compel them to do it. And it's not how do you want them to behave as the brand, but instead to flip it and say how are they behaving and how can we as a brand fit ourselves into their life. So that's the strategy question that you need to ask yourself once you've defined what that goal is. If it's a conversion or not, what's going to be relevant and how are we going to be of service to the people that we're sending our content to, because they don't need us anymore.
Yeah, it's more about, it used to be kind of like as a rule, getting the greatest number of eyes you can get, and it's definitely in 2018 about getting your content in front of the right eyes. And generally that's going to where they already are, which is why in email you already have an advantage.
Yeah, this is great. And it sounds like you're doing a lot on the data side. Beyond opens and clicks, which is so refreshing. What are some ways that you're measuring success that might not be conventional or obvious?
When we get a post on Slack that says, hey, your emails run really good emails, we're like, oh, we did it. I think it's this is horrible to say. None of you will tell my boss this, but I don't care how much money the email makes. I really don't. What I care about is putting something out there that people are talking about, or they're want to forward, or my mom's I saw your burrito email. I'm like, cool, Mom, thanks. My pride is more in giving people things that they give a fuck about, not being I saw your name pop up, so I deleted it. or you clicked on it but you never converted. Like the clicks and all those things, I think we get really wrapped up into them. We get really wrapped up in metrics and what they mean. But and I mean, I always fall back on this, like the human nature of what people interact with and what they're going to continue to engage with in that long-term relationship is more important than what they're actually clicking on.
Yeah, that's a great point. There was an interesting experiment that I became aware of where someone just sent out emails with the same subject line. It kind of said email 1, email 2, email 3. It was a newsletter, and it didn't really impact open rates very much, which was surprising because you would think, oh, it needs to be 3 words and needs to be short and needs to make people curious. And they said, no, actually, if our content is just really good and people actually want to hear from us, we don't have to trick them to open the email.
I started to, this isn't specific to the brand, but it's specific to our internal team on a metric of success. I mentioned it earlier, but we had an email 2 months ago that the header we built for an email then became the header of the .com for the same brand, which in the 16 years I've worked with this client, I've not ever seen creative in an email drive to a major platform. So that for me was proof positive that what we're doing can be that motivating and that driving factor. And then besides that being like an immediate kind of win and reflection for the team, it then became a financial win because that then led to winning 2 new pieces of business. And that was all driven from creating better emails. Better work gets better work.
And on the topic of thinking about the marketing strategy more broadly, how are some ways that you're looking at analytics in email and across other platforms as well? So social, web, anywhere else?
Are you talking about like the cross conversion between them?
Yeah, when you think about you have an audience that's the brand audience, they're not necessarily a separate audience in email or a separate audience in social. So how are you thinking about looking at analytics across of all those platforms?
I can speak widely before you can talk about the numbers. Okay. Broadly, I will say that we just try to be, as I said, channel agnostic, but we lead, especially with any of our clients that we started with just email, we lead that strategy from email. So we take our data and our learnings from the previous work we've done there, and then we just extend that strategy when we're building out the calendaring and the cadence and the messaging to make sure that that's reflected on all of the channels. And if we hit it in email, there might be something that we need to hit in email, and we have to hit on retargeting on social, and we have to hit on some, takeover of some other .com or something. But most of the time, and especially if you have a smaller budget, you'll be able to space those things out, and you don't have to hit everything 5 times. But for us, when we're planning things, that it's the same strategy. We just then think about where the different touch points are.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of times the teams that own those channels aren't working together. So a social team isn't working with the email team, isn't working with the web team, and that's pretty regular across most brands. And so a lot of the time we don't have the luxury of connecting all 3. However, I do think it's important to affect change where you can, and understanding that people don't only consume digital content on one channel. They bounce around, right? They're on social, they're on their iPad, they're watching TV, they're at the brick and mortar. So to them, they're not like, oh, this is different because a different creative team is probably working on this. Like, they're like, these branded experiences should all be the same. So where you can, and this is where I kind of fall back to that playbook of having a system that works, that's established for your brand, and being able to circulate that so that things can be as close as possible, is where we try to push things. But we always want to make sure that we're at least, even if it's not directly our creative, if we're connecting it to a landing page, or, a lot of times we work with Deutsch, because Deutsch does their Taco Bell's creative for commercials down in LA. So we will try to make sure that the creative is consistent, and if it's borrowing assets to merge look and feels to make sure that that's a cohesive experience, those are the type of things that we do to make sure it's the right creative for the person looking at it.
And if it's in your scope, share your own assets also. Because like a little bit of it, when you're like young in your career, and if you're freelancing, you're like, I don't want to do any free work, it just gets me free work. If you're working with a brand that has 6 different agencies and you're trying to get them to all look the same, and you've created assets that part you're doing, and your client provides those assets to other people, you then start to become authority and the design voice among those partner agencies.
Thank you. So a couple more questions, since I know we're a little crunch on time and I want to get to these questions. Was the Cheesy Core email using a third-party tool like LiveClicker?
No.
How did you do it?
We
We developed it. We develop everything in-house.
Okay.
So we did it.
Great. And do you work with any clients that require emails with personally identifiable information, such as Uber, with their data that they incorporate in the emails? And if you do, what are the steps that are required?
Yes, most of them.
I personally don't. We talked about that with Taco Bell, but how depressing would it be if the end of the year it's like, you ate 500 burritos? We're like, I don't know if we want to send that to people.
We do this. We do it for our Lifetime Fitness client, for our apparel client.
The wrong audience over here.
Yeah, not Taco Bell, but almost every one of our other clients, even like our wine clients, we have data, from like Wine Club or the last event.
Angie, you drank 1,000 bottles of wine this month.
I'll tell you a story about that
That's
later. Not 1,000 bottles of wine, but about data. Yeah, no, I'm just
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, one more question.
Okay.
With all the new technological advancements and ways to communicate, do you think promotional email is a danger as a whole? Is in danger as a whole?
Oh, I was like,
sorry.
no. Is in danger. It's only in danger if you let it be. Like, if you do shitty stuff that, you're just, is promotional email a danger? In danger?
Technological
In danger of
advancements. So I think
With the automation and stuff?
No, I think it's becoming more pertinent, and that's because as things become more crowded, when you were only on one or two social networks, you were checking those every day, right? And then email kind of was like what you did for work, or maybe if you were like looking for a specific coupon. What we're finding, and I can at least say for myself anecdotally, is that as social networks became overwhelming, that I've started dropping those things off, and because email is the one consistent thing that I have to go to for work, and that I'll send things to myself so that I'll remember, right? I use it a little bit like this kind of data box that I now rely on and go back to my emails in a way that I wasn't doing 5 or 10 years ago. And that is a little bit like what my joke about email being the new podcasts, right? Like podcasts have been around for a while, but everybody was still listening to the radio, right? Now everybody has their phones, and now you can listen to the radio, but people are like, what is this podcast thing that I can just have in my pocket? I think email newsletters are very much the same thing.
Yeah, I would just add, email has been around for a really, really long time, and, longer than work. Like it is a platform that has outlasted all of the digital channels out there and continues to evolve with different ESPs and different vendors and third parties that are introducing different types of technology. So I don't foresee that going away. I think it's a channel that has a lot of longevity to it. It's up to us to use it responsibly and to not be a brand that's putting content out because you're gonna ruin it for everyone else. So it's more about just taking the responsibility of the luxury that you have of having somebody that's asked for your content and taking that seriously enough to give them content that's actually worth reading.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Big applause for you once more. I think this was a very dense and insightful panel and conversation. And I said today in the very early morning. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes. All right. So I'm going to say it again. Thank you. And I said today in the early morning that this day is about you. You having to stay for yourselves, asking your questions, solving your problems that brought you here and your issues. And we're going to do exactly that now. What's going to happen next is I would ask all of you to move over to the other stage, where there's going to be an interactive workshop by our friends from the Ready and Organizational Consultancy, and they're going to connect you all in fixing your organization's problems, or maybe examining your organization's problems, and working together to work better within your teams and your orgs. So the next 45 minutes is all about you, and please head over there and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.